Hey guys, welcome back to the Lit Mag Lab podcast. I'm Jazz Marie, aka Vevna Forrow. Yeah. So previously on the podcast, I was showing you around another submission management system called Oleada. So if you're curious what that was about, look back at that episode. I also shared technically another submission management system in that episode too, called One Story Submission Management System, right? Or Submission Manager, right? And yeah, so you can listen back to that, watch the episode. I was covering a little bit, free submission management systems there more so. And prior to that, right, in past episodes, I shared Duosuma, Dapple, and a bit earlier on in the podcast, right, in the 30s of this podcast, right, Subfolio, Submittable, and yeah, so if you're looking for a submission management system or you're a lit mag journal editor or founding member and you're looking for a submission management solution, totally check out the submission management section playlist I put out on YouTube, or even look back at those episodes, right? I always try to reiterate them because I don't know which episode you're tuning to first. So again, 35 and 36, 48, 52, 53, and 54. So those were the submission management episodes. I also did a brief overview audio version just on alternatives to submittable in episode 15 earlier on in the podcast too. So yeah, you may see here I am on Fine Print Press today. So we're going to do a literary journal slash magazine episode coverage today. And yeah, if you listened to the past podcast episode or watched it, it was listed in Oleada here, right? And I actually have, by the way, submitted to Fine Print Press in the past. And yeah, so I really think they have a very unique format, akin to, right, Hoot Review, right? Back from episode 50, Hoot Review, what they do is have, a literary magazine, turned into postcards essentially, right? They have issues which are in the form of postcards and envelopes, right? And packaged postcards, which is really cool. And Fine Print Press always stood out to me because they have this newspaper format. And I think that's really distinct and awesome. I grew up personally, I share memories on this podcast too. So I personally grew up, with newspapers, right? I'm in my 30s now, but my dad used to pick up newspapers. And what I used to do, guys, and maybe some of you can relate to this, is like skip all the news and current events and just look at the funnies, right? The comic panels, the strips section there with cartoons. Those always, cheered me up or made me laugh. Over the years, growing up, I collected a bunch of comic books, and totally. Whenever I'd go to half price bookstore, right, I'd get Garfield comics and some other ones. Like I even got Yu-Gi-Oh ones, and yeah, some really other ones like Forge was another one, and yeah, I would have to say in terms of like international comics or things like that. Again, like half my family is in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia. So a series I was introduced because of that, right, was Old Master Q comics. I'm a huge fan of Old Master Q. Totally. If you don't know what I'm talking about, maybe I'll show you at the end of this podcast in a bonus section or PS note, because that was one of my all-time favorite comic series. Now I'm not fluent in other languages, right? And I can't read comics in other languages or anything like that. Although I took, a class, right, in Mandarin Chinese, back in high school, and other classes, right? I took a Spanish class and other things. I'm not fluent in any other language besides English, but I think in terms of comics, the world of comics, you don't really need to grasp another language to get the gist of what's happening in the comic panels. And I really loved that about Old Master Q comics. They always made me laugh. I would reread them over and over again, in the car or road trips or waiting. I would just read comics a lot growing up. And I mentioned myself, I grew up drawing cartoons, both sketch art and with my computer mouse, like computer mouse drawn art. I would oftentimes try to draw like Archie Comics fan art. My parents like got me, Archie Comics, subscription and things like that. They used to get me issues of Archie Comics, and I really loved those. Yeah, and Jughead, right? All the characters. So yeah. Anyways, back to Fine Print Press. So yeah, I love what they're doing. This is a very cool format for sure. So let's get into it, right? I'm gonna do the typical coverage on it and talk about it. So let's go into the about here. I already have it up here. So yeah, I'm just going to read it for you guys and quote it off their site. Yeah. So, Fine Print is an independent literary and visual arts magazine that was inspired in part by the now defunct publication Mother's News out of Rhode Island. It says here, their goal is to showcase the work of independent and up and coming artists and authors in communities around the world. In this way, they hope to catalyze a cross pollination of artistic communities and forward looking individuals. It says here they are a physical publication, not a blog. PDF versions of previous issues can be found on this website purely for archival purposes. Fine Print is published on tabloid size 30 newsprint and is distributed for free throughout the United States. It says here they currently circulate between 5,000 and 10,000 copies per issue. So that's a lot, guys. That's really cool. Massive circulation, right? Fine Print is a labor of love, and it says though they do accept advertisements from independent businesses, artists, authors, organizations, and other things, it says it's beneficial to the creative community. All of the money raised, from that goes solely to funding the printing and distribution of the publication. So look, they have an image here, and that's really cool of it like being printed. And if we scroll down here, there's actually a video, guys. So it's a short 6-second video, it looks like. So I'm actually going to click on it and share it with you guys. So I think it's pretty cool. Let me expand my screen here. So that's very cool. Look at that, guys. That's how it's like produced. That's really amazing, right? That's very cool. I love seeing, the behind the scenes of how an issue is put together. Who knows, guys, with Dippity Lit Mag and Dippy Press, you may start seeing behind the scenes videos from me. I'm just joking. We don't have, our own, press house or anything like that, or, machinery. So I think that's really cool that we get to see that, behind the scenes look at how it's put together, right? An independent publishing house, and it's no doubt expensive, right? And no matter what you're printing, right, whether it be all black and white or full color, it's still expensive, right? Yeah. So newspapers, obviously newspapers in the world, overall have been, I think you could say, in the decline. Some have said magazines were going to like disappear, right? Way back, right? And they're still around, right? We still have literary arts magazines. We still have other fashion magazines and things like that. The thing about them, right? Even if newspapers, right, and magazines in the literary arts world, right, we're seeing more digitization, right, and methods to cut down costs, right? Because print can get expensive, right? It can eat up a lot of resources to do print publications, but I think there's something very special about holding a print publication, right? And newspapers, right? It's just a different feel. Like if you are someone who grew up reading newspapers or magazines and holding them in your hands, I think you just got accustomed to that. And it's, nowadays a lot of kids and, others are used to like digitize stuff, right? And the feel of holding a book even, and paperback journals, I think having something to hold on to print wise, like a print version of it, is, I think, it's a special feeling that it's different from just reading something on a screen, right? And the brightness is hitting your eyes, right? Or your eyes can get tired of reading screens all the time. I don't know. I grew up, reading a lot of, paperback, hardcover books, newspapers, all kinds of stuff like that, right? So I really like, even like Hoot Reviews, postcard publication series. I really love these unique styles, right, of publishing. Yeah, so I think it's cool what Fine Print Press is doing, right? They're highlighting that newspapers are still very, look at that circulation, guys, 5,000 to 10,000. That newspapers are still, really important in the world, right? That I've seen even some services that do some fun things for others. Like you can GIF like a newspaper format style GIF, right? Or they turn some content you have into a newspaper, right? There's services I've seen out there like that. Like fun, gift sets you can do of newspapers. I don't remember what they're called. I came across them, I think, earlier in the year. There was this place that's doing that. In any case, there are some places that, do, newspaper, besides Fine Print Press, do newspaper, right, styled publications and series, right? But there aren't as many as there were, let's say, right, newspaper styled ones, right? Like, decades ago, right? Like a decade ago or way back, right? And the history of newspapers is very fascinating. I was actually reading about it again today, or tonight, I should say, too, a little bit. Um, and yeah, so newspapers, like, you should look into. I'm not gonna do a history coverage of it. It would be a very long podcast episode, right? Several hours long. But you should look into that. It's pretty fascinating, actually. When newspapers were invented, the earliest newspapers ever reported. I think it's pretty cool. And I don't know what the earliest lit mag or journal was, in terms of like format wise. Like, obviously, like, I've seen shows and series mentioning, poets were published in a newspaper, right? Or they had their work appear in a newspaper, right? So I don't know what the earliest ones in existence were off the top of my head, but read about it, right? The invention of the newspaper, it's very cool. Any case, yeah, so that's about fine print press. So I'm gonna go out real quick before we'll hop back to their website here and submission guidelines and stuff, but I have their chill subs page up too. I'm gonna go over here. So yeah, this is chill subs again. Now this isn't accurate, right? They actually do have open calls. Again, chill subs is up to typically the editor at the very currently to really update calls and open windows, right? So I think you know this is inaccurate, right? As I showed you in Oleada, and even if you go on social media, they do have an open call right now, and the deadline is August 15th, 2025. They did extend that. Sometimes places do extend deadlines a couple times, and that's okay. But yeah, so just know that this is inaccurate. So, I like to go out to places social media. Also, I check Duotrope as well. And, it's showing temp closed, I think, on Duotrope right now as well if I go out there, but that's not accurate either, right? And it says they publish 2 times a year. So something maybe Fine Print Press could do, or even other publications, right? That I mentioned this on the podcast, right? It's beneficial to have like recurring windows. I think then you don't have, like, I know some lit mag journals and presses, right? They have multiple windows across the year, and it's hard for them to really do that. But I think if you have like 2 windows like reoccurring every year, then you don't really have to worry about maintaining those listings as much as like having sporadic open windows throughout the year. At Dippity Lit Mag, Dippity Press, we sort of have, we don't have reoccurring windows at this time. Who knows? We may have set windows again, but we're doing a relaunch, so we'll see. Anyways, yeah, so you can see, right, they do have a fee, right, and that's accurate. $3. It says here they were founded in 2011, and response time is averaging 56 days, and this isn't necessarily accurate, right? The acceptance rate and everything, because we go to stats here, right? You can see only 9 track their stats in here, right? So it's as more, submitters, use chill subs tracker, right? As there's a large volume of, submissions being tracked, the more and more that do that, right, the more accurate those stats can be, right? That is just yeah, how it is. Same thing of Duotrope, right? The more that enter in their tracker stats, right? Duotrope has its own submission tracking system, right, that others can use if they have, an account with Duotrope, right, and the membership, right, that they have a monthly. So, yeah, the more and more that do that, right, the more accurate those stats can be, right? So right now there's not a whole lot of stats in there, and that's okay. Not everyone tracks everything, but I think it's beneficial to others who are using platforms like Chill Subs or Duotrope. So yeah, yeah, that is pretty much it in terms of an overview of fine print press. However, I want to cover a couple more things out on their website, right? So let's look back at their call that's open right now too. So if you go to fine print press in Oleada and scroll down, right? So they focus right on this open call that is closing August 15th, 2025. Illustrations, comics, photography, and there's poetry here, right? And prose, flash fiction, essays. So it says here, right, up to 5 pieces for, this call here: illustrations, comics, photography, 300 DPI. They do not accept any submissions that were created using AI, and any submissions that do not adhere to their guidelines will not be considered. And then again, for poetry, up to 5 poems. Each poem should not exceed 3 pages. Simultaneous submissions are permitted, but they ask that you, of course, inform them if it's been accepted elsewhere. All rights revert to the author upon publication, and they do not require a cover letter for these, by the way. And yeah, flash fiction, essays, prose. So again, up to three pieces there, different, right? Each piece should not exceed a maximum a word count of 1,200. And yeah, your upload submission should be as a PDF file here, right? And then yeah, same thing of poetry. And then, illustrations, comics, right? This is PDF or JPEG file, right? So yeah, and it says here at the bottom again, $3 submission fee. So I know, whenever you see a submission fee, you're like, oh, I'm bummed out, I can't submit, right? Or you may be a poet or writer or artist listening to this saying, I don't like paying submission fees. I don't want to pay the fees. So if you go back to their website, right, and go to the submit section, I covered this already in the past podcast episode, but they do state, if the fee is a problem, reach out to them and they can do possibly a fee waiver. So yeah, they have a pay submission fee button, so it's not like a one click thing because Oleada doesn't have any, integration systems like Stripe or PayPal directly embedded in there. Oleada again was designed to be mostly, focusing again on places that don't charge submission fees. So that's why they never really added, any payment integrations or things like that. But I think, Oleada, if it, continues to grow or, down the road, if they're going to do anything with it, right? I touched based on the developer, right? So, I think it'd be nice to have optional tip jars though for publications in there or something. Yeah. Any case, right? They have a PayPal button here. And so then you do that and then you go back and submit out on Oleada to their submission call, right? It takes you to their, Oleada page, right? So, yeah. So yeah, I've submitted to them past again. I never, have gotten acceptance. I don't know if I submitted twice to them or I know I submitted at least once to them in the past. But in any case, I think a fine print press does a very stellar job. It's really cool what they do. I mean, newspapers, you wouldn't really think about that again. When you think about literary magazines and journals, right? As I mentioned, same thing on the Hoot Review podcast, talking about postcards, right? You wouldn't really expect a literary magazine or journal to be in that format, right? Look at some other publications, right? They're doing typically traditional, right? Zines or magazines or gloss style paper one, paperback ones. There are some hardcover, series out there too. But I think Fine Print Press is one of the few ones out there that's like a newspaper styled, right? Issues. And I think that's really cool. And it sets it apart from a lot of other literary magazines and journals out there. So yeah, let's go over to issues and check out some of them, right? Let's take a look. So it looks like issue 14 was one of the most current ones, and I really love the artwork. They do a great job, of the layout and everything, just from what I've seen. You can, order a hard copy of these, and yeah, and that's really nice, So we go to like, just for example, and check this out. The art is amazing. I love, learning about, I check out their social media account. They do share, some sample poems and, some of the, artists that they featured. And it's just really amazing. Look at that. The artwork is so cool, right? Black and white, and it's pretty cool. Yeah. What was issue one? So yeah, you can see it's really really stellar. Yeah. I'm someone who likes having, visuals and arts in issues and things like that. So I love that they do that. Let's go into one of these, right? So this one I think is crossed out because it's probably out of stock. That's what I think it's indicating. And then yeah, so let's go out to one of these. I'm trying I'll just click on one, order hard copy, right? So what happens here? Let's look. So see it, right? It's $0. So then you just end up, paying for shipping then, right? And, if we go back here on their, issues page, right, you can download the PDF version, right? I think that's nice that they offer a downloadable PDF. So if we do a download PDF on this one where you can't, it looks like order a hard copy, right? If I click on this, right, it says sold out, right? So issue 10 is sold out. And if we download a PDF, right, it's going to take us out to the Internet Archive. So I think that's really, a good idea, actually, to have the publications accessible in the Internet Archive, that way, and you can, on the Internet Archive, there are ways you can, download, right, it too, right? I've looked at that. And I was looking into this. I mentioned on the podcast, I was looking into uploading our legacy issues since we're doing a relaunch, our older ones possibly to the Internet Archive. I'm not sure yet. For right now, we just offer it, like we've done those offered through our site and stuff like that. But we're doing a relaunch. So, yeah, anyways, at Dippity, right? So I think that's nice. If you're a lit mag journal editor, right, you have to think about like where you want to have like, do you want to have a digital version available? I think it's a good idea to offer multiple formats like this too. Yeah, so I know some lit magazine journals offer PDF version too. It could be, I mentioned on this podcast, I don't remember the exact number of the episode off the top of my head, but I shared PDF flipbook readers. And some places use those to, allow others to flip through past issues. The thing about those PDF readers, right, is that they, the more you upload, right, some of them have storage limits. So when you stop paying for those, right, they remove your issues from the, space. For most of them is what I've seen. Not all of them, perhaps. But the Internet Archive is one place, right, where you can, right, upload things and there's no cost to you or anything like that, right? You have to follow Internet Archive's terms of service and everything and usage, right? So, yeah, I know if you dig through the Internet Archive and type magazine or newspaper or other things like that, you'll come across some really cool things like that, issues, from way back. It's pretty neat what's in the Internet Archive, how massive it is today. They really depend upon the support of others, around the world to keep it going, right? Donations, totally, the Internet Archive. So, yeah, you can totally flip through, past issues of, Fine Print Press through the Internet Archive. I think that's really nice. So let's take a look at what Astro is. I don't know what that is. So it says Letters to the Elements. It's a column of astrology themed epistolary poems by Dylan Krieger that appears on the back page of each issue of Fine Print. So that's really neat too. I haven't read this before myself, so I won't go through it, obviously, all of it, but that's really unique too, I think, right? And yeah, so a lot of lit mags, journals, and presses have like very unique series, or sometimes they do something in each issue that's pretty fun. Like what I did with Dippy Lit Mag, for instance, was like a riddle, right? A riddle poems. I did like a riddle series for a bit. I don't know if I'm going to continue that, but I like creating like riddles and mysteries and stuff, and answer stuff like that, right? Question answer type things. I grew up with a lot of riddle books and stuff like that. They used to buy because I love jokes and books and riddle books. That's just me. But anyways, yeah, I just love riddles and jokes. I like things that bring a smile on my face, or humorous comics and things like that, and art. So yeah, they have a vinyl record here that's pretty unique. Their merch shop is pretty unique, I'd say. There's another literary magazine, not literary magazine, but a magazine in existence actually that that does vinyl records, if I recall, or something like that. I think it was Heartworm magazine. So they've totally published poetry in the past too, though. But yeah, they have a very cool vibe and style. Yeah, so I think it was called Heartworm magazine. I could be wrong. Anyways, there are some magazines out there where I've seen they do vinyl records, and that's pretty unique too. So let's go out to Stockus, right? So these are locations where they are, probably have been not necessarily shelved, but where they're carried, right? Yeah. So you can see California, Illinois, right? Louisiana, Maryland, Massachusetts, Michigan, New Mexico, New York, North Carolina, Oregon, Texas, Washington. So they've been, carried in quite a few places across the U.S. That's a really, really cool. It looks like there are a lot of Louis, oh gosh, I'm tongue tied. Louisiana places for sure. That's really cool. Yeah, so I showed you, the submit section already, right? So let's go off to advertise. So this is what they were stating, right, in terms of offering advertisement space. And a lot of lit mags and journals and presses do this, right? They use space in their issues to, offer, businesses or artists or others to put in ad placements, right? Dippity, we didn't really have this. We had like more like a book rec section, almost like an advertising section, but it was free. And some places have free advertisement sections, but quite a lot of lit mags and journals out there typically will have some sort of rates and sizes, right, that you can choose from. And yeah, so they have, set aside space for a certain amount of advertisements in each issue. Some advertisements, I think these rates are fairly reasonable. There are some places I've seen that, are several $100s, or can even be several $1,000s, right? Or in the $1,000 range. And those are ones, it depends on their circulation, really. I've seen that more so from like poets and writers, right? And I myself have done, advertisements, in print ones through, I shared this on the podcast, right? Through Carve magazine. And I did like a bookcase shelf styled ad with like my ebook series, but that one, it didn't have any print at the time. And it was just, I was just testing, I wanted to try out different types of in print ads just to see, the results. And I didn't see a lot of traction from that personally, but that was just because I think of like what my series was at the time. Like I was just easing back into poetry. I didn't really have anything, really fledged out series wise. It was just like some rando poetry a little bit. Some of those collections, not all. But yeah. And then I did, not just Card magazine, but I also put one small book ad in Poets and Writers as well. So yeah, advertisements can get expensive, but sometimes if you're already a contributor of an issue, sometimes they give discounts too on ads. But I don't know about fine print press. Anyways, this is their rates and sizes, and I think that's fairly reasonable. They have a pretty good circulation. I'd say 5,000 to 10,000, right? That's pretty massive. And yeah, and they're carried in a lot of locations, as you can see here, right? Across the US. So that's awesome. What else on their site? Let's take a look, guys. So, I covered Submit again, their guidelines, some of it, right? And they have a donate section. I believe this takes you out to PayPal. So yeah, it looks like they have a YouTube channel and they're on Blue Sky and Instagram, right? So yeah, it's a good website design. That you can join their mailing list. And the reason being, right, why they have are carried the most in Louisiana, right? They're based out of Baton Rouge, right? Louisiana, right? Yeah, so you can see that, right? It looks like, yeah. So yeah, typically, in terms of getting, picked up in places, right, shelved or, carried at various locations, you typically want to start locally and then branch out. That's what I've seen. I was sharing my failing points at getting, picked up at locations and stuff. And it just takes time, and, I think with a relaunch, we'll see how it goes at, the Lit Mag and Press I run. But I think what Fine Print Press does, right, you can really see the amount of work it goes into like putting together the issue, right? I showed you, right, that video clip they have of like the issue being printed. That's really cool, right? And I must say I really love it. So I might have to grab, some physical copies. I was just peeking into, right, from time to time what's out on Internet Archive. And yeah, but in either case, I think it's really nice. It's it's not several, it's not like 20, 30, 40, $50 issues or anything like that, right? It's showing like $0 and you just pay for shipping, right? And I think it's a really great series that Fine Print Press has established, right? And yeah, they have some really cool cartoon work on the mugs there. And again, the vinyl record, limited pressing of 300. I think that's really unique, right? It says 6 new poems read by the author, right? Dylan Krieger. I apologize if I mispronounced any names there. But I think that's really unique. I may have mentioned, I don't recall if I did, but Heartworm Press, right? They have like some sort of vinyl records that they have in their store too. It's another public. They do publications too. Heartworm Press, another very cool one that I'm aware of. But they don't have like newspaper styled issues or anything like that. So I think this sets Fine Print Press apart from most literary magazines and journals out there. This newspaper styled, issue series. And yeah, so I again, really love what they're doing, and it's a really phenomenal issue series. So yeah, I'm gonna have to again, pick some up, grab some, look out some more of the past issues. I've only again seen what's mostly out on Internet Archive and some of the PDF versions. So, I think, reading it, physically having it, they have, appears like limited quantities. So eventually some of these issues go out of stock, right? So, yeah. So I think it's nice that they offer PDF versions and give others the option to order it, right? And to just pay for shipping, it looks like. Yeah, anyways, that's Fine Print Press. Yeah, so check them out. They're about to close their next open window here, right? It's August 8th again, closing August 15th. They extended the deadline. I don't know if they're going to extend the deadline again. It happens sometimes. Even I myself have extended deadlines and calls a couple times, because the volume changed, for that month or year. So we had to adjust the call. But yeah, anyways, I love how they feature different artists across their issues, and it's always a uh, very cool to see I've popped into their stories like on social media from time to time, and you can see them like literally carrying stacks of the newspaper issues and stuff. I think I saw like a van one time. I could be wrong, but it was just so cool, and yeah, so you can tell they absolutely are passionate about what they do, at Fine Print Press. And who knows, maybe they'll get rid of the submission fee one day, entirely, right? A lot of places can't do that because it helps offset costs again, I mentioned, but, with enough donations and support or other things, right, or the series growing and growing over time, right, sometimes places can discontinue fees completely. They do fee waiver request again, and $3 isn't much. It's not too bad. Some places have really high fees, but it's very, a couple bucks, right? So anyways, so that's Fine Print Press. Definitely check it out. You can check out their website. I'll drop link to it. And yeah, so it looks like, again, their call window's about to close here. So, totally bookmark them, check out their next open call windows, and yeah, have awesome days ahead, guys. I think the next literary journal or magazine or press, we might cover is going to be another one that I came across through Olieda, right, in the listings there. One that I saw was still, holding an open call and things like that. So we're going to try and cover a couple lit magazine journals and presses that are outside of the US now, too, a little bit more. So I think we'll start with Canada, maybe a couple places in Canada, and then maybe in Europe and elsewhere. So I'll try to do some more episodes covering, just pointing things out about site design, guidelines, issues, what's again stands out to me about them and things like that, So I hope you like these episodes. Do the best I can. And yeah, take care, guys. And that's it for this episode. Yeah. PS, guys, so this is one PS note here. I mentioned, one of my favorite comic series, right, in existence. I just want to share it real quick with you just for fun, right? I share memories on this podcast, things that some publications remind me of or things in my life. I grew up, I would say also, sometimes my folks would pick up The Onion, right? You guys know what The Onion is, right? So we used to pick up like print, newspapers of The Onion and just for fun too and read those. Yeah, I like reading like humor style, magazines and, newspaper comics and stuff like that myself. Anyways, one of my all-time favorite, comic series is Old Master Q. So this is what it is, what I was referring to. It looks like, they do have English versions too, right, on their site, and you can read some of the panels and stuff. If you've never read or checked out Old Master Q comics, guys, check it out. I highly recommend it. It'll make you laugh. It'll brighten your day. It always was something I would read through. I still have a bunch of the Old Master Q comics today. One of my all-time favorite series. Even my dad would read them sometimes. So it always was a lot of fun. Yeah. So check it out sometime. Yeah. And yeah. So that's it for this podcast now, guys. Just wanted to add that bonus bit there. Share, and I think again, just want to give a shout out to Fine Print Press. I think what they've shown here is that they've really exhibited that newspapers are still very much important, right? They've brought life into the newspaper world, right, in terms of the literary art space, and really elevated it, right, with the format they have, featured artists, right, the poetry and everything, right, the different sections in the issues. I think it's really cool, the style they have, the layout. It's it's I mentioned earlier in the podcast, right, the decline of newspapers, but I think just the growth they have, right, several thousand in circulation. I think that's amazing, and I hope they continue to grow that circulation and roll out, get up to issue 50, 60, 70, yeah, so it's printing issues is without a doubt very expensive, and so, absolutely donations help a lot of lit mags and journals, and totally. So yeah, I would say I am a fan of fine print press for sure. There's issues and serious, what they're doing. This format is very unique again, so highly recommend you try to pick up an issue of fine print press when you can, or even just a digital version. Give it a read sometime. Very cool what they're doing. So bye guys. Yeah, now take care. Right, no more PS notes, no more. For this episode anyway. I'm not going to guarantee on the next one or the other ones, but yeah. So yeah, bye guys. Yeah.